I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 5. Prelude to War. 1st April 1990. 336-mile orbit. Above Iraq. The KH-11 reconnaissance satellite, or Big Bird, passed over the partially destroyed and abandoned industrial site south of Baghdad. The industrial center had been damaged long ago during the Iran-Iraq War, and due to the country's economic slowdown, it had never been repaired or rebuilt. Each time the satellite passed over, it acquired the same images it had for the past couple of years. Broken and missing window panes marked the outside of the buildings. These were intermixed with torn and broken pipes, leaving rust stains that streaked along the cream-colored sides of the buildings. There was nothing of significance about this industrial center. Weeds and grass had taken over the service roads, the parking lots, and the storage areas that used to house whatever it was that used to be built here. At least, that was what the Americans saw on the surface. What the Iraqi government wanted the world to see. What the American spy satellite couldn't see, however, was the immense complex built below the surface. When the Soviets had helped the Iraqis build this complex, they'd made sure the communication nodes linking this center were spread out in various directions to throw off the Americans' ability to detect what lay beneath the surface. The complex was tied together via miles of fiber optic cables connected to dozens of remote transmitters at different sites, miles away from the new nerve center of the Iraqi military and government. To further aid the Iraqis in avoiding detection by the West, the Soviets would conveniently provide them with the overflight schedule of the American satellites. This helped ensure they didn't have any equipment or work crews nearby prior to a satellite overflight. Inside the command center. The air was electric. A sense of energy, purpose, and excitement could be felt by everyone present. Everyone who was anyone was seated in the large conference room for this very special meeting. Tonight was the night, the unveiling of a plan that would solve Iraq's immediate financial problems and position it to become one of the dominant nations of the world. The front 2 rows of seats were occupied by those closest to Saddam, while the remaining rows were held in reserve for the military leaders and their staff officers, who would undoubtedly be taking copious notes for their respective bosses. The officers in attendance were those who held division and brigade command positions, the ones who'd repeatedly sworn their oaths of loyalty to Saddam, who had in turn seen their careers advance ahead of their peers. The room was not lacking in ambiance either. The first 2 rows in the room contained a total of 15 overstuffed armchairs for the VIPs, who'd be sitting in the front. The room was adorned with elegant and expensive Persian rugs that covered the seating area of the marble floors, giving the room a warm feeling. Being underground, there were no windows. Still, the lighting was bright and rich as it illuminated the place from opaque glass panels built into the walls and by overhead fluorescent lights mounted in the acoustic tile ceiling. On the wall facing the chairs was a projector screen, ready to display information and maps when the time was right. Several maps also graced the walls between the opaque panels. Standing in front of their seats before Saddam walked in was Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, and for all intents and purposes, the face of Iraq. He was the man all the Western media wanted to talk to when they needed someone from Iraq. Aziz was seated to the right of Saddam. To the left of Saddam's chair was Abdul Jabbar Khalil Shanshal, the defense minister. Next was Ibrahim Ahmad Abd al-Sattar Mohammed al-Tikriti, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff. Al-Tikriti was in charge of the Iraqi armed forces and was the man responsible for defending the nation. The next most important military leader was the Republican Guard commander, Saif al-Din Fulayih Hassan Tahia al-Rawi, who was seated to the right of Aziz. The Republican Guard commander and the Army Chief of Staff were in constant competition, as the Republican Guard did not answer to the army but to Saddam directly. Other noted attendees included the Minister of Intelligence, the Air Force Commander, the Air Defense Commander, the Presidential Secretary, and the Presidential Advisor, Ali Hassan al-Majid, commonly known as Chemical Ali for his actions against the Kurds and Iranians. These men had been meeting frequently since the end of the Iraq-Iran conflict the previous year, as they sought to rebuild the country and return it to its prior glory. Their communications with each other were closely monitored by the Director of Military Intelligence, ensuring no electronic emissions were intercepted by Western powers. To further ensure that they had indeed covered their tracks, the Soviets agreed to monitor their transmissions for anything that could indicate military action. Although the Soviet communications and intelligence operators monitoring the Iraqi transmissions were not told about the forthcoming operation, they were doing the Iraqis a favor by just observing their general chatter and helping to ensure they weren't making it any easier than necessary for the West to eavesdrop on them. When Saddam walked into the room, everyone became quiet, and those in the front row were accepting handshakes and bowing slightly in return. Saddam was all smiles. A young colonel stood at attention, about to give the most important briefing of his life. He was honored that he had been selected for this task. Saddam took his seat, accepting a glass of tea, and nodded to the colonel to begin his presentation. Saddam was very familiar with what was about to be presented, as they had, for the past year, developed, refined, and war-gamed the plan for Project 19. "Good morning, sir. My name is Colonel Ibrahim. Our purpose this morning is to present to you the final plan for the upcoming operation, Project 19, the young colonel said. Saddam just nodded and sipped his tea. "First slide," Ibrahim said, and a slide appeared via the overhead projector. "This first slide is our mission statement for Project 19. He kept quiet while Saddam read the slide. Again, Saddam nodded when he finished. Mission. On 1st August 1990, combined Iraqi forces attack and seize Kuwait City and secure the Saudi-Kuwait border. Simultaneously, Iraqi forces will move to and secure Wadi al-Batin on the Saudi-Iraq border. Forces along the border will remain at alert status and be prepared to continue the attack." "Next slide," Colonel Ibrahim said. "Sir, this is the task organization for the initial attack." "This is going better than I thought it would." "Next slide," Ibrahim said. A map of the first phase of the operation appeared. "Sir, the Kuwaiti forces will be on their annual holiday leave during the time of our attack. This will leave them ill-prepared to confront our forces or mount any sort of effective counterattack. Their forces, consisting of the 6th Mechanized Brigade located in the north, nearest our invasion point, are equipped with M113 personnel carriers, BMP-2 fighting vehicles, and old Vickers tanks. The 15th Mechanized Brigade is located south of Kuwait City and has M113s and Chieftain tanks. The 80th Infantry Brigade is in garrison in Jahra. They have some Saladin armored cars, but nothing modern. The 35th Armored Brigade is west of Jahra, with their base at Ali al-Salem Military Airfield. 2 companies of the 8th Battalion of the 35th Armor are in the north, currently without their equipment, guarding the oil fields. Naval vessels are in port at their main naval base, located south of Al-Salem. The crews are also on leave at this time, as are most of the Army forces for their annual summer leave. Ibrahim explained. Saddam smiled. So no one will be there to greet us is what you're telling me. Everyone chuckled at his weak humor. Continue, Colonel, Saddam directed. Sir, to execute this invasion as flawlessly as possible, we have developed an elaborate ruse. We are moving forward with a large training exercise in our southern provinces, consisting of most of our armored and mechanized infantry forces. From outward appearances, it will look like we are engaged in a very large combined arms exercise, while in reality we will be moving the bulk of our army into position to launch a blitzkrieg assault across the Kuwaiti desert, Colonel Ibrahim exclaimed proudly as he puffed his chest out a bit. Several of the generals and senior leaders smiled and nodded in agreement. Even Saddam smiled at the cleverness of the plan. He motioned with his hand for the colonel to continue with the briefing and bring them up to speed on the units that would be involved in the initial invasion. Mr. President, Generals, the 1st Republican Guard Corps will launch their attack as the main effort on 1st August with 2 armored divisions, 2 mechanized divisions, 3 motorized divisions, and a brigade from the 8th Oz-Saika Special Forces Division. At 100 hours, a commando company from the Airborne Brigade will seize the border crossing at Safwan. The colonel used a wooden pointer to indicate the location on the northern border between Kuwait and Iraq, where Highway 80 crossed. The attacking unit will execute as follows. At 300 hours, the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division with the 17th Brigade will attack and link up with a commando company at this point here. The colonel pointed to a small border crossing at Safwan. These units will be the first element for the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division under the command of Major General Al-Ujaili, who will lead the invasion. The 1st Hammurabi Armored Division will attack with the 17th Armored Brigade and the 8th Mechanized Brigade moving along Route 80. They will be followed by the 6th Nebuchadnezzar Mechanized Division and the 3rd Tawakkalna Mechanized Division on the right flank, Ibrahim explained, pausing to allow everyone to study the map and let his words sink in. Simultaneously, he continued, the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division in a supporting role will attack from the west with the 25th Infantry Division and the 35th Motorized Division following in reserve. The colonel paused to take a sip of his water and give everyone a moment to follow along. Continuing, he added, the 4th Al-Fau Infantry Division will secure the left flank of our armored thrust into the country. They'll secure objectives along the islands of Warba and Bubian. The 9th Corps will follow 1st RG Corps as they move south to secure southern Kuwait. Some of the officers talked amongst themselves, whispering something to an aide who then scribbled something down. "And what about the 7th Corps and the 3rd Corps?" Saddam asked. "Sir, the 7th Corps remains in the north, keeping the Kurds in check. The 3rd Corps will be our strategic reserve, maintaining vigilance along the eastern border, which we feel cannot be left unguarded." Ibrahim observed Saddam studying the map intently. He appeared to be holding his questions for the moment, so Ibrahim pressed on. To position our forces for this invasion, the 2nd Republican Guard Corps will move 4 days prior to the jumping-off point at night to a holding area in the vicinity of Wadi al-Batin, along the neutral zone. To maintain our ruse, the 2nd Army Corps in the west will continue to conduct training exercises as part of the deception plan. As Ibrahim continued the brief, he suddenly became aware that most of these generals and senior officers had absolutely no idea they had been preparing all this time to invade Kuwait. Wait till I tell them what the second phase of the operation is. Some are liable to have heart attacks, the colonel was thinking, and, in 1 or 2 cases, hoping. Security had been so tight that some key players were not aware of what was being planned and was to be executed shortly. Breaking the silence, General Al-Rawi, Chief of Staff of the Republican Guard, took over this part of the briefing from Ibrahim. "Sir, the Phase 1 operation will consist of a main effort along Highway 80 from Safwan South to Mutla Ridge overlooking Kuwait City. There will be a heliborne assault on the pass at Mutla Ridge prior to the arrival of the 17th Armored Brigade. A supporting attack will come from the west on secondary roads. To reduce the possibility of resistance, a commando heliborne assault will be executed into Kuwait City to capture the emir, his family, and senior government officials. The 3rd Tawakkalna Division is the right flank of the main attack. Its immediate task is to seize the Ali al-Salam Air Base and link up and conduct a passage of the 2nd Al-Medina Division from the western axis. The 3rd Tawakkalna Division and the 2nd Al-Medina Division will assume positions between Al-Ahmadi and the Saudi border. The 1st Hammurabi Division will then move in, seizing the area between Al-Wafra and Saud Port south of Kuwait City, General al-Rawi said, before asking, "What are your questions, sir?" "What is the plan for the use of the 8th as Saika Special Forces Brigades? If you do not include them, they will be upset," Saddam joked. Last week, elements of 2 battalions of the 8th as Saika Special Forces Brigade slipped into Kuwait and began inciting the protests against the emir. At 100 hours on G-Day, they will move along the Abdali Jara Kuwait City Road with the primary mission of seizing the emir and his family. The 1 battalion of the Special Forces Brigade will also be seizing the choke point at Mutla Pass. At approximately Oro 400, the Parachute Brigade of the 8th as Saika Division will conduct a heliborne assault to seize the royal compound and key government buildings in the city. Sir, if you have no questions, this completes our briefing on Phase 1 of the operation. "And how long do you see this phase taking?" Saddam asked, shaking his glass to indicate he wanted more tea. While they paused for the tea to arrive, he pulled out a pack of Marlboros and lit up. When he was ready, General al-Rawi fielded the question. "Sir, we see Phase 1 taking no more than 48 hours. Once 1st Republican Guard Corps has passed through Kuwait City and taken up positions along the Kuwait-Saudi border, the 9th Corps will follow and can mop up any resistance in the city, which we do not anticipate will be much, if anything. Tell me about how you are overcoming the Americans' ability to intercept our radio communications," the Iraqi leader said. "Sir, learning from the Americans and their actions prior to the Normandy invasion of World War II, we have established false headquarters for each of the divisions and corps. At the appointed time, they will take over all communications for those elements and pass pre-planned message traffic indicating administrative information typical of garrison positions," Sultan Hashim Ahmed Al-Tai, the Minister of Defense, said. "And how do we mask our movement from the satellites?" Saddam asked, attempting to cover all his bases. "Sir, the Soviets have been good enough to provide the time schedule for the overflight of the American reconnaissance satellite. Our movement will be at night, and only when the satellites are not overhead. When they approach, we will be camouflaged and in hiding," General Al-Tikriti responded. Saddam stood and turned to face the assembled officers. As he was smiling, they all felt reassured that he was pleased, but they could not be positive. "I do not have to tell you that swift action is required. I suspect the Americans will attempt to interfere despite the words of their ambassador, who I will see in a few days. I have no doubt that we will be successful in accomplishing this exercise, but retaining our position will be the hard part. It is going to take diplomatic strength and the power of the media to rally support." Turning to his deputy prime minister, he said, "Aziz, we must use the press to our advantage for this operation. The American ambassador, April Glaspie, will, according to our sources, say that the dispute between us and Kuwait is an Arab-to-Arab dispute and of no concern to the Americans. I don't believe her for a minute, but we must push that communication. I believe the Kuwaitis are being hard-nosed because the Americans are pushing them to be so. You will meet with the Kuwaiti foreign minister on 30th of July for a final time and ask them to agree to our terms. If the Americans were not backing them, they would have rolled over weeks ago. We need to use the press to show that the purpose of this action is to remove the Americans from the region and end their domination over our affairs. When the Arab world sees this, they will rise up with us and cast the Americans out. Get CNN Christiane Amanpour here when things start, and let her tell our story to the world. She has credibility with the world. And besides, she is easy on the eyes, they say. Saddam said with a smile. Everyone else smiled too, as if on cue. I am satisfied, but what are your concerns? General Hassan al-Rawi was the first to speak up. I am concerned about the American fleet. They have a small flotilla of 4 ships in the Gulf right now. But not far away, near Oman, they have a large carrier battle group with 81 strike aircraft at their disposal. They also have another carrier battle group off the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and then they have their air base at Incirlik, Turkey. General Hassan al-Tikriti fielded the comment. First, we have sufficient anti-aircraft missiles around Baghdad and major facilities to handle their aircraft. Second, the anti-aircraft umbrella over our ground forces to include missiles and guns is sufficient to deal with those threats. And lastly, we have a fighter interceptor force of sufficient size to deal with those aircraft as well. The Americans will be reluctant to enter into a large air campaign once we have seized the major cities for fear of inflicting civilian casualties. As for those 4 ships currently in the Gulf, we will dispatch them in the early hours with Exocet anti-ship missiles if it comes down to it. Enough, Saddam said. Silence fell on the room. Do not engage those ships, he ordered. Turning to the Prime Minister, he instructed. Once we cross the frontier, notify the Americans to remove those ships from the Gulf, or they will be destroyed. We do not want to provoke a fight with the Americans, and attacking their ships first will only infuriate the American public and incite them to demand action. Tell the Americans that those ships must leave, but do not attack unless they engage any of our forces first. Tell them we do not wish for another Stark incident and request they move the ships out of the Gulf for the present time. He continued. Diplomatically, as soon as we enter Kuwait, they are going to go running to the UN Security Council. We need a strong argument to prevent any resolutions from being imposed on us. Get with the ambassador and be sure he is prepared. Saddam looked around the room. We cannot fail, he said simply as he turned to leave. Then he paused for a moment and turned back around to survey the room. Good, I am satisfied. We will meet again when 1st RG Division reaches the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. We execute on 1st August. Chapter 6. National Reconnaissance Office. 16th of July, 1990. Pentagon. Washington, D.C. Bob Daly sat in his office cubicle in a rather plain office building in Washington, D.C. The building was known as the Pentagon, and his office was on the 2nd floor, underground. Access to his office was through a set of yellow double doors that required a code to unlock the door and a special pass. Just because you worked in the Pentagon, that didn't give you free access to every office. Bob had been in his line of work since 1975, when he was discharged from the Army after coming home from Vietnam and graduating from college. He had majored in photography in college and expected a career taking pictures of glamorous movie stars. For the past 15 years, he had worked in a windowless office, not knowing what the weather outside was like. In the winter, he came to work in the dark and went home in the dark to his 2-story home in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Kingstown subdivision of 1,000 homes. Every 4th home was identical, and although it was a civilian community, it could almost pass for a military housing area as everyone either was military or worked for the government. He found the work interesting, but nothing exciting. Bob was a photo analyst in an organization that did not exist. He could not talk about his work, even with his wife, or tell anyone the name of his organization. At social gatherings, when asked about his job, his pat answer was, "Oh, I'm just a paper pusher in the Pentagon." His wife suspected differently. The National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO, was owned by the Central Intelligence Agency. That said, it had several masters, to include the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, the National Security Agency, NSA, and the various services. The mission of the NRO was to manage the nation's fleet of intelligence-gathering satellites from launch to the analysis of what was sent back. Sometimes what came back was film that had been dropped from space and retrieved by an airplane as it descended to Earth on a parachute. News of this satellite had been widely published in the early years of the 1970s because someone could not keep their mouth shut and spilled the information to Time magazine. An article had come out in August of 1971 and let the whole world know that we had a satellite that was watching the Russians. The article even gave the code name for the satellite, Big Bird, or KH-9. As Big Bird took pictures and dropped the film, the Russians had thought it was a dead satellite, as it did not transmit signals. Thus, they never covered anything up when it flew over every 90 minutes. Thankfully, the article said nothing about the fact that, since 1963, the KH-7 satellite had been watching them. Prior to this, everyone had thought we were getting high-resolution photos from the U-2 or SR-71 aircraft. When Bob had joined the organization in 1975, the investigation into who had leaked the information was still ongoing. Since Bob had joined, however, he had seen more satellites come into existence that had much higher resolutions and were capable of downlink transmissions. What used to take 6 to 7 days to get back and be developed and then analyzed could now be done in about an hour once the satellite was over the target. The KH-11 satellites remained in orbit and used electro-optic transmissions. The recently launched Current satellite had an infrared capability, which enhanced the data that Bob was receiving. Since the satellite was equipped with a hydrazine-powered propulsion system, its orbit could be adjusted. The KH-11 was serviced by the Space Shuttle on classified missions to keep it running well into the future. Targeting for the satellite was the problem. Everyone thought what they wanted to look at was the most important thing in the world and should have top priority. Bob was thankful that he was not involved in the targeting process, which was handled by some high-paid government employees. He would have liked to have their pay, but not the headaches from every user always crying about how they couldn't get their pictures taken. I come to work, I look at pictures, I write up what I see, and I go home. No headaches. What more could a guy ask for? Bob was constantly thinking. The sign on Bob's cubicle door read, "Your priority is not my problem." And that was especially true today, as he was going home to celebrate his 10-year anniversary. "Hey, Bob, we just got a download that I'd like you to look over. You should be able to finish that up before you leave today. Oh, happy anniversary. Where are you taking her tonight?" asked Bob's supervisor, Cliff Jeffrey. Cliff was a GS-15 and had been in the job since the early 1960s, having started in the CIA and transferred over to the NRO in the early 1970s. "Just spending a quiet evening with Jane. Her parents are taking the kids tonight," Bob said as he slipped the floppy disk Cliff handed him into the computer. "Anything in particular I'm looking for?" he asked. "Not sure yet. The satellite made a pass over the Middle East earlier today, looking at something for the Air Force in western Iran and these areas of Iraq and Kuwait." "Okay, let's have a look," Bob said as Cliff moved off to talk to another analyst. Bob started scrolling through the pictures. The resolution wasn't bad. These pictures were from the Crystal satellite, which offered synthetic aperture radar, SAR, imaging, producing high-resolution pictures both day and night. Because it used SAR technology, it was not adversely affected by clouds or dust. As Bob sat there sipping his coffee, he was almost getting bored looking at endless miles of sand. But then he sat up straight and leaned into the computer screen. Wow, what have we here? The picture was a night picture, and clearly showed a large formation of vehicles, tanks, and combat vehicles with support vehicles, all moving towards the Basra region of Iraq. As he examined the pictures one after another, he could determine the speed and direction of movement. When he started counting vehicles, he recognized that this was no small unit move, but a major deployment of an entire division. Reaching for his phone, he pressed the intercom button and asked Cliff to come take a look. "What you got?" Cliff asked as he looked over Bob's shoulder. "Look at this concentration of vehicles on the move," Bob pointed out. Studying the computer screen, Cliff asked, "That's a shitload of vehicles. Do we know where they all came from?" He was bewildered by what they were looking at. "You don't see armored formations on the move like this very often in your life," Cliff added. "No, I haven't pulled up any previous pictures of Iraq to get an idea of the point of origin," Bob said. "Damn, I should have done that before I called him over here. I'll do that now and get back to you. Damn it, I'm not going to get home early tonight." "Yeah, make a comparison to determine where they're coming from, and order up another pass to see where they went. Then write it up. It's late now, so order up the pass and then take off. Finish this up in the morning. It may be that they're maneuvering to go kick some Iranian ass again," Cliff concluded, as he walked off to finish up paperwork, which never ended in the Pentagon. Bob did as instructed, and ordered another pass. The results would come back in the night, and he could look at them when he came in the next day. He really didn't expect to find anything. Cliff is probably right, he thought as he gathered his papers. Still, you didn't see a movement of vehicles like that very often, so it certainly warranted further investigation, if only to verify that it was just a training exercise. I mean, this isn't the Fulda Gap or West Germany, but still. Closing shop, Bob ejected the floppy disk and removed his hard drives, placing them in the safe next to his desk. Nothing could be left out when you left your office, or weren't going to be at your desk. If someone from the outside came into the room, everyone had to cover their desks and monitors with canvas covers and wait for the visitor to leave. Visitors were seldom invited into this room, largely because it meant just about everyone had to stop working and stow their classified materials until the visitor left. Driving home that night, Bob found his mind drifting back to the photos. If they were moving to go kick Iranian ass, why were they moving towards Basra? There's only one bridge over the river, and it's on the south side of Basra. But where would they go from there? Something isn't making sense. When he arrived back at his house, Jane met him at the door. For a woman in her mid-30s with 2 kids, she was still very attractive and turned heads. She also had the top 3 buttons on her blouse open, and it was obvious she wasn't wearing a bra. Her form-fitting jeans accentuated her narrow hips and tight bottom. The high-heeled shoes added to the ensemble only drove him further crazy with lust and desire. Her auburn hair was shoulder-length and freshly cut, just the way he liked it. She knew she was driving him wild with excitement and anticipation of a night alone without their kids. Worse, she kept toying with him as he entered the living room and sought to take his sport jacket off. He saw dinner was on the table, but he wasn't sure he could wait. Fuck it. Dinner can wait. "I want my dessert first," he thought, as he gave her his best smile and a wink as he motioned with his head in the direction of the couch. Her face lit up like it was their honeymoon as she glided across the living room and the clothes began to fall off. They never did eat dinner, but they had a fun, romantic time. Just the 2 of them, no kids as they lay there naked on the couch, reminiscing about the years that had gone by and all the things they still wanted to pursue as a couple. Bob had to admit, he was one lucky man. He had a great job, a beautiful wife, and 2 beautiful, amazing kids. Life didn't get any better than that. The next morning, he arrived at work while it was still dark. Such was the life of a tunnel rat in the Pentagon. He had arrived before most of the people in the office, as he found he could beat the DC traffic and find a relatively close parking place that way. It also meant his 8-hour shift often ended before traffic picked up again later in the afternoon. Besides, he had gone to bed early last night and slept great after a time. Walking into the office, he saw he was, as usual, the first person there. One of the unspoken rules to opening the shop was you had to get the first pot of coffee going for the office. Most people would walk in with a cup of coffee from the coffee shop in the food court. After that first cup, they would head to the office coffee pot for round 2. Considering nearly every person in the office had either been in the military or worked for the government for many years, they were all heavy coffee drinkers. While the pot started brewing, Bob opened his safe and withdrew the floppy disks, the hard drives, and his papers and notes. Loading up the hard drives and booting up the computer took as long as it did to get that first cup of coffee. One of these days, he thought he just might wash out his coffee cup. But hell, not today. The permanent coffee stain ring showed just how much to put in. As the computer came online, he inserted his floppy with the original photos. He studied them for a minute or two, as if something on it might have changed overnight while locked in his safe. The dinging sound alerted him to the fact that some more photos were waiting for him to download, since he'd requested another pass of the vehicle formation right before he had left for the day. When the screen came up, he mumbled, "What the hell?" What he saw was amazing and disturbing. The unit he had tracked yesterday afternoon was now stopped, but it had doubled in size overnight. What he was looking at was a division instead of a brigade. Not only that, but it appeared that another large formation was farther north behind the first unit. On the left side of the picture, he could see elements of another formation that fell out of the span of the camera. What am I looking at? Is this a full corps of armored vehicles, artillery, and tanks? Those appear to be T-72s and BMP-2, and they're just 12 miles north of the Kuwait border. As he sat there studying the photo and making comparisons, he zoomed in and out a few times to count some of the things he was seeing, like tanks and other vehicles of interest. Then Cliff entered the room. "Morning, Bob. How goes it?" "Cliff, get over here and see this." "What you got?" Cliff asked, carrying a coffee mug with him to Bob's desk. "I think we have an invasion force going to Kuwait," Bob said with a bit of excitement. "Whoa, hold your horses there, General Patton. Let's not launch the missiles just yet. Let me see what you have," Cliff said, looking over his shoulder. As Cliff looked at the images, he moved his glasses from his forehead to his face. After a minute, he nudged Bob's shoulder. "Let me sit down." Bob got up and relinquished the chair and monitor to Cliff, who studied the photos and scrolled through the new downloads. Then he would jump back to the original photos. As Bob stood there, he suddenly felt like the world was watching. He looked up to notice that almost the entire office was standing around them, looking at the screen. Finally, Cliff looked up at Bob. "Order up 2 more passes in the next orbit to the west of this last pass. I want a picture of western Iraq, Wadi al-Batin and western Kuwait. Also, after you get those 2, I want to pass over western Iran to see if anything's moving there." As Cliff stood, he turned to the assembled group. "Folks, these next 3 passes are the priority, and if anyone gives you grief, you tell them to take it up with me. Bob, grab everything you have so far. We're going to see the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The rest of you start pulling everything you have on Saddam and the Iraqi army. Any pictures, anything." Chapter 7. Brief back. 28th July, 1990. 17th Armored Brigade. Khor al-Zubair, Iraq. Brigadier General Ra'ad al-Hamdani, commander of the 17th Armored Brigade of the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division, knew something big was about to happen. His earliest inkling that something was up was when his commander, General al-Ujaili, had been ordered to attend the 15th July conference with Saddam. Following that meeting, his brigade had been ordered to move from their home base in Jaikur to the northwest, crossing the river on the one bridge located in Basra, and then to a position north of Khor al-Zubair. Then, on the 28th of July, his division and brigade had been given the order to begin Project 19. "We crossed the border on 1st August and are only just getting the order," he said to his operations officer, who tried to shrink away from his ire. General al-Hamdani tried to arrest his anger, declaring in a calmer manner, "Okay, let's get the staff working on this, and bring in the commanders when we have a plan. As I look this over, I have some concerns that we must be sure to consider. Speed is of the utmost concern. Speed ensures surprise, and surprise ensures fewer casualties. We cannot allow ourselves to get bogged down in city fighting. Second, I am concerned about civilian safety. I have nothing against the people, and therefore I want to minimize such casualties. If we can get there fast, they will have less of a chance of putting up resistance, and thus there will be less of a requirement for us to engage them. We will not employ artillery prep fires, and I want the tanks to be uploaded only with high explosive shells. No sabot rounds. We hit their tanks with HE, and that will scare the crap out of them and not destroy the tank or kill anyone." Thinking out loud, he added, "There is a checkpoint on the border where Highway 80 crosses. A commando unit will take that checkpoint and clear it for us. No one is to be killed. When we roll through, we will have the 6th Mechanized Brigade opposing us forward of Mutla Pass. If we are fast enough, we can get there before they get organized. Hopefully before the 35th Brigade in Kuwait City can move up to close the pass. Does anyone have any questions? If not, assemble the staff, and let's start putting a plan together. We don't have very long to get things ready." 5 days later, the battalion commanders were assembled along with company commanders. Al-Hamdani outlined the battle plan for the brigade over a sand table map of Kuwait and Kuwait City. General Al-Hamdani explained, "We will attack in 2 columns to this point between Abdali and Jarrah on the northwest side of the city. The left column attacks to block the 6th Kuwait Brigade, while the right column rushes to seize the Mutla Pass. This will prevent the 35th Brigade from coming in from the city and reaching the pass. Once both columns are through the pass, the battalions will move to their objectives." Pausing, Al-Hamdani looked up from the map in front of him and turned to the 1st Battalion commander, who would lead things off. In this case, the 1st Battalion was a tank battalion. "Colonel, your battalion will move to and seize the 5th Circular Road and the Royal Palace, the International Hotels, and the Ministry of the Interior. Conduct link-up with the 8th as Psycha Special Forces elements at the Royal Palace. Any questions?" he asked. The 1st Battalion commander looked up from the map and acknowledged he had none. Redirecting his attention to the 2nd Battalion commander, he said, "The 2nd Battalion follows the 1st Battalion and takes the 7th Circular Road and the Kuwait International Airport, to include the Air Force's base. Conduct link-up with commando forces at the International Airport. Any questions?" There were none. 3rd Battalion, you are the main effort. Your armored task force will have an infantry company, an engineer company, an artillery battery, and an anti-aircraft company. You will move to seize the 6th Circular Road and cut through the center of the city, disarming the police, the Royal Guard, and any resistance you encounter. You will advance to the water and circle back to link up with the 1st Battalion. My command post will travel with you. Any questions?" Again, the commander had none. "I cannot emphasize enough that speed in execution is paramount for our safety and the safety of the civilian population. Do not allow your lead elements to get behind the schedule, but have them bypass if necessary, and have follow-on elements deal with any resistance. What are your concerns?" Al-Hamdani asked. "Sir, what about the radar balloon that the Kuwaitis have in the north overlooking our border? Will they not see us moving against them?" The 1st Battalion commander asked. "They probably will, but it will be too late for them to sound an alarm. We will be in Kuwait City before they can react. The Kuwaiti army is on leave at this time, except for the 8th Tank Battalion, which is on guard duty in the oil fields without its tanks. We should make short work of what few forces they still have on duty. Any other questions? Sir, there are British soldiers stationed in Kuwait. What if we meet them? The 3rd Battalion commander asked. Yes. The British have a contingent of military personnel with their families in Kuwait. Iraqi amphibious troops of the 8th as-Saiqa Special Forces Division will land at several locations on the Kuwaiti coast. Some will land near Fahahil and secure the IBI residential camp, where a group of British servicemen working with the British liaison team live with their families. We will not engage them, and we will not enter that residential camp. We do not want to give the British any excuse to come to the aid of Kuwait. Sir, may I ask, what is our follow-on mission once we have seized the city? The 1st Battalion commander asked. The other commanders nodded and looked to Al-Hamdani for the answer. At this point, he could not divulge that information. There was a fear that if someone was captured, they might reveal the follow-on mission, which would cost them the element of surprise. That is a good question. Sorry I did not cover that. On order, and once we have secured our objectives, we will move from the city center to a holding area south of the city and north of the border. I will establish my command post in Al-Hiran Resort, Al-Hamdani said with a smile. The battalion commanders exchanged knowing grins. What? Shouldn't I have a comfortable place to rest my head? He said with a sly grin. The 18th Armored Brigade will be establishing its command post in Al-Wafra. Let's see to it that we don't crowd over into their territory. General Mustafa al-Hassan is a very jealous man and would be raising the roof if we did. Just leave them alone. Once we get settled in Al-Kiran, I want all the vehicles topped off with fuel, ammo, and a 3-day supply of food and water on each vehicle. I want every vehicle inspected and any required repairs to be completed within the first 24 hours after our arrival. Is that understood? Hamdani concluded. Everyone acknowledged that they understood his intent, but their facial expressions showed questions. I know you're wondering why you're being asked to upload ammo and food for 3 additional days, Al-Hamdani was thinking. Well, just wait. Chapter 8. Royal Palace of Dasman. 1st August 1990. 3rd Special Forces Brigade. Basra International Airport. Colonel Farouk al-Basra walked the hangar floor with his senior non-commissioned officer, checking their soldiers' equipment and saying a few encouraging words to his men. These were professional soldiers, well-trained for the mission at hand. Some were even sleeping while they waited for the order to load the helicopters that sat outside. As he wandered around the hangar, he came upon his 3 company commanders, who were sipping tea that they had found. This would be their last chance to sip tea before the mission. The 3rd Special Forces Brigade's mission for tonight was the seizure of the Royal Palace of Dasman and several key government facilities in the center of the city. The government buildings would be the responsibility of infiltrators that had been in the city for the past week, acting as demonstrators against the emir. Their role was part of the deception plan to convince the world that people were dissatisfied with the ruling family. As Colonel al-Basra approached the company commanders, they said in unison, "Good evening, sir." One offered his cup of tea to the colonel, who was appreciative but refused. "How are your men tonight?" the colonel asked. Unlike many Republican Guard commanders, al-Basra had a deep love for his soldiers and concern for their welfare. Too often in his career, his survival had depended on the man on his right or left. Soldiers fought for each other, and taking care of soldiers was what it was all about for him. His soldiers saw this, and they truly loved the man for it. They would follow him anywhere in combat. "They're all good and ready, sir," Captain al-Bishi said, as the others nodded in agreement. He was the first company commander and the oldest, being 32 years old. He was also the most decorated soldier for his actions against Iran. "Good. And you have explained your mission to them, and they are good with what they have to do?" the colonel asked. Yes, sir. I explained that when our aircraft land on the north side, we move to secure the northwest access point and the northeast entrance, then link up with those elements of the brigade that infiltrated the city over the past week and allow them access while denying anyone the ability to leave, Captain Albishi said. Colonel Al-Basra nodded his head and looked to the second company commander. Without being asked, Captain Hafiz said, "We follow first company and immediately head south, clearing any resistance as we move towards the central palace to assist third company." "Sir, third company is the main effort," Captain Musin said with some pride, "and fast ropes to the roof of the central palace to search for, then seize and secure, the emir." "Good. You all understand your respective missions. Do not forget, the 2nd Battalion of the brigade will be landing at the same time to the southeast and breaching the perimeter to move towards the center of the palace complex. 3rd Battalion lands to the northeast, sweeping towards the center. The Royal Guard barracks is to the northeast, so I suspect the 3rd Battalion will have a hard time of it if the Royal Guard is alerted. We do not want to get in a firefight with our own people. Understood?" Al-Basra asked. "Understood, sir," the three said in unison. "Farouk, you understand that it is imperative that you prevent anyone from exiting or reinforcing the palace, yes?" "No one will get in or out once we are on the ground," Captain Al-Bishi said, as he noticed the soldiers all starting to stand up. The battalion operations officer was standing in the open hangar doorway, rotating his right arm above his head, the universal sign that it was time to load the helicopters. 6 Mi-17 helicopters stood outside. In the next hangar down, 6 more Mi-17 helicopters were loading as well, and 6 more beyond that. He couldn't see further down the flight line, but he knew that several more groups of 6 aircraft were loading up with their human cargo as well. With the 3-man crews aboard each aircraft, the 2 Klimov VK-2500 PS-03 turboshaft engines were spooling up to full power. As each soldier approached the aircraft, they were assisted by the flight engineer, who helped to pull them up into the helicopter. While they were not carrying parachutes, they still had 100 pounds of combat equipment on them. As the 24 soldiers per aircraft were loaded, each took a seat on the benches that lined the sides of the aircraft. Colonel Al-Basra took a seat in the 4th aircraft, which was the first aircraft for 2nd Company. He felt that 2nd Company was going to have the hardest fight and wanted to be with them. He had a great deal of confidence that Captain Albishi would not need his guidance once on the ground. As he sat there looking down the inside of the aircraft, he felt it lift off. He checked his watch. It was 0330. After a 30-minute flight at low level over the water, they should touch down at 0400, while it was still dark out. As Colonel Al-Basra sat and stared out the open door in the side of the aircraft, all he could see was open water and blackness. There were few ships in the northern part of the Arabian Gulf. Casting an occasional glance towards the cockpit, he could see the lights of Kuwait City getting closer. The Kuwait towers were lit up and easy to see, as they were the prominent nighttime feature of the city. The 3 needle-shaped water towers dominated the Kuwait skyline and had been a tourist attraction since 1979. They were now located just northeast of the palace. Looking to the south, along the coastal promenade, he could see Green Island, an artificial island created in 1988, and another popular tourist attraction. Its lush gardens and central lagoon were clearly outlined in lights. The city was well lit, which provided reassurance that their mission had so far gone off undetected. Finally, the flight engineer turned in his seat and held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes to touchdown, and then the world, as they and everyone else in the Middle East knew it would change forever. Al-Basra said a silent prayer, not for himself, but for his soldiers' safety. The helicopter's engine changed in pitch, letting him know they were near the objective. The pilot flared the nose a bit to further bleed off airspeed as the rear wheel of the giant helicopter touched down. Al-Basra was the first out of his aircraft and sprinted to the tree line on the southeast side of the helicopter pad they had landed on. Arriving at the tree line, he took a knee and surveyed the actions of the soldiers. He was surprised that he was hearing sporadic gunfire already. His men were under orders not to start shooting until they were fired upon. Suddenly he realized it wasn't his men that had fired first. They were being engaged by the Royal Guard Brigade protecting the palace. One of their heavy machine guns had started shooting at his troops. His soldiers didn't have any heavy machine guns. Instead, he heard the whooshing sound of an RPG and an explosion. The reports of the heavy gun fell silent. It appeared First Company had silenced the gun. In the well-lit areas, he could see that men from First Company were fanning out to block the entrances to the palace compound. Second Company's soldiers were closing in all around him and quickly moving across the street to begin advancing towards the central palace, the residence of the emir. As the company commander gave the order to proceed down the main street, his first platoon moved out, only to be met by a hail of bullets from the residential buildings lining the street. Now Colonel Al-Basra was convinced the Royal Guard must have been alerted to their arrival. This was not going to be as easy as everyone had predicted if the guard force had been given fair warning they were coming. They'd likely called for reinforcements and had their garrison fully deployed to meet them. As he looked in the direction of the residence, he saw one of his helicopters was in a hover. His Special Forces soldiers were fast roping to the roof. 2 more helicopters were waiting to discharge their human cargo as well. To the northeast, more helicopters could be seen, delivering members of the brigade to their objectives around the palace. From the black night sky, 2 streaks of flames erupted and raced towards the barracks occupied by the Royal Guard. The explosion that followed left no doubt in the surrounding residents that the palace was under attack. Second Company had a fierce engagement with the Royal Guard Brigade soldiers when a patrol in an armored car approached the helipad. They'd likely wanted to see who had arrived and had been summarily ambushed by Second Company. It was more important than ever to move quickly and secure their objectives before more reinforcements could arrive and alter the balance of power. More gunfire erupted to the northeast, near the barracks area of the Royal Guard. Second Company was fully engaging them at this point. Then muffled gunfire could be heard from the vicinity of Third Company. They were inside the residence, and it appeared that the emir's internal security was putting up a fight. Why doesn't the old fool just surrender and stop this nonsense of fighting us? Colonel Al-Basra thought. As the colonel moved down the street following Second Company, he received a transmission from Third Company. The residence was secured, but it would be some time before Second Company could reach them. The Royal Guard was putting up a fight to prevent the link-up between the 2 companies. Picking up his radio handset from his radio operator, Al-Basra called Third Company. "Have you secured the emir in a safe place?" "No, we have not." That was not the response he was expecting. "Well, why not? I thought we discussed this. Search, seize, and secure. What did you not understand?" A moment later he got his response. "The emir is not here in the palace," Captain Musin said. "What? How do you know? Who told you?" Colonel Al-Basra was beyond mad that the emir had somehow escaped. "Sheikh Jaber al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Saba told me that the emir was notified at 2200 hours that his compound was going to be attacked. His security moved him to the Ministry of Defense building. Somehow they were tipped off that we were coming." "Did he tell you who notified them?" "No, he did not." Damn, this was a wasted exercise if we did not catch the slippery dog, Colonel Al-Basra thought. With the handset still in his hand, he had his RTO changed to a frequency that would allow all his elements to hear him. If the emir wasn't in the compound, then he wasn't about to waste good men on a mission with no value. "Sir, First Company Commander wishes to speak with you," the colonel's radio man said, holding out the second radio handset for the other radio to him. "Bishi, what is it?" the colonel asked. We just intercepted a car attempting to enter the compound and engaged it. Sheikh Saad al-Abdullah al-Salem al-Sabah, the emir's half-brother, was in the back seat, Captain al-Bishi said. Excellent. Bring him to my location. Maybe we can have him convince the Royal Guard to lay down their weapons, al-Basra offered. Afraid he cannot help us. He was shot while his security team tried resisting. Unfortunately, he died, Captain al-Bishi said. The colonel did not answer. What else can go wrong in this operation? Picking up the handset, he transmitted. All units, proceed with your missions, but do not take any unnecessary risks. If you find a pocket of resistance, contain it until the 1st Republican Guard Division arrives and let them deal with the problem. The sun was just coming up, and sporadic gunfire could be heard in other quarters of the city. It seemed the Royal Guard was attempting to conserve their resources while they waited for help to arrive. At 1300, Captain al-Bishi reported that a tank from the 17th Brigade was at the gates. That was fine by Colonel al-Basra. Let the Republican Guard deal with the Royal Guard. Our mission is complete. It's now the 17th Brigade's problem to deal with these holdouts. With his unit's objectives complete, Colonel al-Basra went looking for a comfortable place to take a long nap. Chapter 9. Battle of the Bridges. 1st August 1990. 35th Armored Brigade Headquarters, west of Al-Jara, Kuwait. Captain Khan had drawn the short stick to be the duty officer for the night shift. He had wanted to be on the day shift, where all the action was, but that wasn't to be. Then the phone rang. Hello, 35th Armored Brigade, Captain Khan, duty officer. Captain Khan, this is Colonel al-Sarur. Put the brigade on alert and order an immediate recall. Colonel Salem Masood al-Sarur commanded the 35th Armored Brigade. He continued, I want all commanders and staff in the headquarters in 1 hour. Tell the 7th and 8th Battalions to upload their ammunition immediately, and the 51st Artillery as well. Have the 57th Mechanized Battalion get their people back and prepare their vehicles. Do you understand? Yes, sir, of course. What is happening? The 8th Battalion only has 1 company here, as the other companies are on guard in the northern oil fields. The 57th has 1 company deployed on Bubian Island and 1 on Failaka Island. Do you want me to recall them as well? Captain Khan asked, in excitement, as the adrenaline began to kick in. The Iraqis are preparing to invade. Get everyone you can. We may not be able to recall the deployed units, but I still want them on alert. Now get the alert orders out immediately. Colonel al-Sarur said, almost shouting. Yes, sir. As the alert went out using alert rosters, soldiers began arriving back in the unit areas. The real problem they were going to face, however, was that annual leave had started. Many people were out of town, or could not be readily reached. They'd have to go with whatever soldiers they could muster in such a short time. It was nearly 0300 hours when Colonel al-Sarur could finally meet with the bulk of his staff officers and commanders. He didn't waste a moment. Gentlemen, I want to bring you up to speed on the situation as it stands right now. It appears the Iraqi forces have officially crossed our border at 0030 hours and now occupy Al-Ratka. Those present exchanged looks of disbelief and bewilderment. They are attacking down Highway 80 as we speak. It looks like they are going to try to seize Mutla Ridge with a heliborne assault, just like they seized the Dasman Palace and the International Airport. Right now I need to know the status of your units, al-Sarur said, as he looked at the 7th Battalion executive officer. Sir, I have not been able to contact the battalion commander as of yet, Captain Nassar said. As soldiers report, I have been checking them in. If they have any tank experience, I am assigning them to a crew and a tank and sending them to upload the ammo. None of our tanks were previously uploaded, so right now that is what we are doing. It is going to take some time, I am afraid. How many tanks have you manned thus far? 10 tanks, sir, Captain Nassar said, a bit dejected. And the status of 8th Battalion? The colonel asked, looking at a company commander from that battalion. "Sir, our battalion commander with 2 companies and some dismounted infantry is up north on guard duty. I am the only commander back here, and I have 10 tanks. We are uploading ammo and fuel as we speak. Our company just came back from up there. I have all my crews either present or en route at this time," Captain Al-Abdul Karim reported. "Very good, Captain. Status of the 57th Mech?" the colonel asked, looking at another company commander. "Sir, the anti-tank company is fully manned and uploaded," Captain Malouf indicated. "Good. I want you to move out at 4:30. Initially deploy in 2 sections. One section I want to go to the Ali al-Salem Air Base to provide security, and the second I want to secure the intersection of the 6th Circular Road and the Salmi Road. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Captain Malouf said. "And the rifle company?" Colonel Al-Saror asked, looking at the officer seated next to Captain Malouf. The colonel could not remember the captain's name, as he had only recently taken command. "Sir, my company has 5 BMP-2s ready, and several of our M113s are in the process of uploading their ammo. The BMPs have completed their uploads," the captain said. "Artillery, status?" "Sir, we have put together enough people at this point to man 7 of our M109 self-propelled guns," the battalion executive officer said. He could not locate the battalion commander, so he'd taken charge for the moment. Just then, the door opened, and LTC Ahmad Al-Wazan, commander of the 7th Tank Battalion, came in. "Forgive me, sir, for being late. I had difficulty getting through the city." "I understand, Colonel. Your executive officer has been on top of the situation." "All right. At 600 hours we depart with 7th Battalion as the lead element. We will move to block the forces coming down from Mutla Ridge. We will follow Salmi Road and take up positions along the 6th Circular Road. Colonel Al-Wazan, you are to take positions on the north side of Salmi Road. Captain Al-Abdul Karim, you take 3rd Company and take up positions on the south side of Salmi Road. This will place the bridges that overpass Highway 80, Salmi Road, and the 6th Circular Road between your 2 forces. Any questions? If not, then let's get ready to move out," Colonel Al-Saror said. Sitting inside his vehicle, Colonel Al-Saror knew that in 5 minutes, the 7th Tank Battalion would move out and head for its objective. He glanced over to the east. The sun was just starting to crest over the Arabian Gulf. The orange, yellow, and pink sky announced its coming. It would be another warm day, but July was always warm here. As he watched the sun rise, he wondered if it would set on a free Kuwait. If help did not come, he knew the answer to that question. To the west, he heard a thunderous explosion that quickly snatched his attention. A black mushroom cloud rose above Ali al-Salem military airfield, where one of his 2 sections had moved. "I hope they were away from that," he thought, as the 1st Chieftain tank rolled past his position. He counted each tank as they drove past him. A smile appeared on his face when the 37th drove past. Good. 3rd Company of the 8th Battalion had 10, and that means that 7th Battalion was able to get 27 tanks out. In a gunfight, they will be equal to the T-72. Now if the engines will just hold up. As the 7th rolled onto the Salmi Road, they crossed to the north side and took up a dispersed battle formation. The 3rd Company did the same on the south side. It was obvious that the days of training had paid off, as each formation displayed discipline and tactical acumen. He was pleased by what he was seeing. His driver pulled out behind the last BMP of the 57th Mech and followed the formation. "Sir," his radio operator said to get his attention, "Colonel Al-Wazan reports he is pushing out his reconnaissance element to scout Highway 80 to Mutla Ridge." "Acknowledge his report and have him keep us informed," Colonel Al-Saror replied. As the brigade moved forward, Colonel Al-Saror could see helicopters over the city to the east. Some were Iraqi Hind gunships, and some were troop-lift ships. It appeared they were concentrating on the center of the city, probably the Royal Palace and some of the downtown government buildings. It took 30 minutes for the 7th Tank Battalion to report that they had reached their battle position, which was about 1 kilometer off to the southwest side of Highway 80 and the 6th Circular Road. Shortly afterwards, the 3rd Company also reported having attained their position. Colonel Al-Wazan reports that the lead element of a tank column is moving on the 6th Circular Road towards his position. He is requesting permission to engage. His reconnaissance elements have also withdrawn so they don't fall behind enemy lines, the radio operator informed Colonel Al-Sarur. Tell him to engage when he is ready. From what range is he going to engage? Al-Sarur asked. He said he'll look to engage them between 1,000 and 1,500 meters. Good, Al-Sarur answered, knowing that the main guns on both tanks were equally matched. The chieftain would have the advantage of being hull defilade, and therefore difficult to spot on the open roads compared to the T-72. Now if we can just keep the attack helicopters off us. His thoughts were broken by explosions and black smoke in the distance on both sides of the interchange bridges. The 3rd Company, 8th Battalion, had not been idle, but had coordinated with Colonel Al-Wazan on how best to attack the Iraqis. Colonel Al-Wazan allowed the first couple of Iraqi tanks to pass his position and move in front of Captain Al-Abdul Karim's position. When Al-Wazan was ready, he gave the command to fire, and Captain Al-Abdul Karim directed his fire on this first few tanks. The incoming rounds tore apart the first tanks, leaving behind only burning wrecks. Those tanks now blocked the road. The column stopped and rotated their turrets in the direction of the fire, seeking targets, which they quickly found from the clouds of dust caused by the concussion from the muzzle blast. With the initial element of surprise gone, Colonel Al-Wazan found it prudent to withdraw before he started to lose tanks himself. Seeing the size of the enemy force heading towards them, he realized his mission needed to change. Instead of trying to repulse the Iraqi attack, they were going to have to settle for stinging the enemy as they gave ground for time. He gave the order after discussing it with Colonel Al-Sarur. Fortunately, Colonel Al-Sarur had the artillery engage the Iraqi formation to cover the withdrawal of the 7th and 3rd Companies from the 8th Battalion as they withdrew to new positions further southwest along the Salmi Road. Once they were in their new positions, Colonel Al-Sarur had Colonel Al-Wazan and Captain Al-Abdul Karim join him. Nice job this morning. We at least bloodied their nose, Colonel Al-Wazan said. Yes, we did, but we have another problem now. It seems that a second front is approaching from the west on the Salmi Road, coming up behind us. The 51st Artillery spotted them and reported that one brigade is out front, with one battalion forward and a separation of a couple of kilometers between the 1st Battalion and the 2nd. Colonel Al-Wazan, what do you think? Sir, I think we can sting them again. I propose we ambush this 1st Battalion here. Then, before any of their other units can close the distance and get us bogged down in a shooting fight, I swing my forces south, and we make a run to join the 15th Mechanized Brigade down south, Colonel Al-Wazan offered. Sir, what about helping the 80th Brigade in Jahra? Captain Al-Abdul Karim asked. With there being a concrete barrier dividing the road down the middle of 6th Circular Road, I don't see a way to get to them. I am afraid they are on their own at this point. I wish I could do something for them. Maybe they can hold out until we join the 15th Mechanized Brigade and make a counterattack. No one really had any other ideas at the moment. They were clearly feeling a bit defeated, but were determined to make the Iraqis pay for every inch of Kuwait they managed to take. Okay, if you have no further questions, I suggest we get ready to meet this new threat, Colonel Al-Sarur said. The others departed quickly to get back to their units and start implementing the new plan of attack. Captain Kassan had left his vehicle momentarily to join one of his sergeants, who was sitting on a sand dune with a pair of binoculars. They weren't 100% sure just yet what kind of unit was heading in their direction. Colonel Al-Sarur was attempting to get clarification on this when the lead element appeared on Salmi Road. They appeared to be flying green flags from their antennas. The sergeant suddenly started waving his arms, trying to get the attention of Captain Kassan, and Colonel Al-Surur, who was still in the vehicle on the radio, trying to communicate with someone. "Colonel, a column is approaching from the west, but it appears they are flying Saudi flags on their antennas. Could this be a coalition relief force coming to aid us?" the sergeant said with relief and excitement in his voice. Colonel Al-Surur scrunched his eyebrows at the news. The fog of war was again playing havoc on his mind. Had the 51st Artillery misidentified the column approaching? "Captain Kassan, see what this force is and who their commander is, so I may speak with him," Colonel Al-Surur directed his assistant operations officer. Captain Kassan was suddenly feeling pretty good that a coalition relief force had acted so quickly and was coming to their aid. He walked out onto the road and approached the first vehicle. The tank then stopped when the commander saw him approaching. Suddenly, Captain Kassan got a terrible sick feeling in his gut. He was standing in front of a T-72, flying not a Saudi flag, but the divisional flag of the Al-Medina Armored Division, which also happened to be green. Mustering up all the courage he could, he approached the tank. "Who are you people, and where is your commander? Do you have any idea where you are and where you are going? You people are as screwed up as a goat herder. Get your commander on the radio and have him come up here. I will be right back and will speak with him personally," Captain Kassan said with all the bluster he could muster. Before the bewildered tank commander could reply, he turned on his heel and walked back toward the sand dune he'd come from. Once over the dune and out of sight, he took off at a dead run to tell Colonel Al-Surur these weren't Saudis. "Colonel," he panted as he approached the colonel's vehicle, "we have to get out of here." "Captain Kassan, what are you talking about? Who is the relief column and where is their commander? I must speak with him and coordinate our efforts," Colonel Al-Surur said with a bit of irritation in his voice. Kassan was sucking in air, as tankers were not exactly known for running distances. Why bother when you drove around in a tank all day? "Sir, that is not a relief column for us. It is a relief column for the Iraqis. It is the lead elements of the Al-Medina division. We need to get out of here," Captain Kassan said, pointing in the direction of the column. "Driver," Colonel Al-Surur said, "mount up, we are leaving, now." He grabbed the hand mic for the radio. "All elements, the lead elements of the 2nd Republican Guard Division is approaching on Salmi Road. Execute the plan as discussed. Over." The 7th Tank Battalion had already repositioned to new locations that would allow it to engage elements as they approached the interchange between Salmi Road and the 6th Circular Road. Captain Al-Abdul Karim had also repositioned as an infantry company from the 1st Elements engaged on the 6th Circular Road had dismounted and moved towards his position. That Iraqi infantry company had no anti-tank weapons with the range to reach his tanks, but knew that his machine guns could reach them, so they were reluctant to move too close and engage. Waiting in a hide position at hull defilade while an enemy force passed in front of your guns required a great deal of patience and discipline. The engagement must be shocking and overwhelming to have its intended effect. If one undisciplined gunner fired before the enemy was in the ambush kill zone, the ambush would not achieve the desired results and could enable the enemy to flank the ambush and destroy the ambusher. Fortunately, the gunners of the 7th and 3rd Company were very disciplined. On the order of Colonel Al-Wazan, the 7th opened fire at 1,000 meters. Their fire was accurate and deadly as several vehicles were hit and exploded. As the enemy turned their guns to engage the attacker to the north, 3rd Company opened fire and several more vehicles exploded. Lieutenant Colonel Al-Wazan was not about to let this element get off easy and called for artillery fire from the 51st Artillery Battalion. The 51st could not fire as the forward observers were repositioning and could not see the action. Radio communication was also failing, which only increased the fog of war, allowing the lead elements of the 2nd Republican Guard Division to escape the kill zone. Slowly, Surviving enemy elements began to turn their vehicles back out of the kill zone. Once they exited the area, they attempted to flee the Kuwaiti forces that had caught them by surprise. As they fled south and west, the forward observers of the 51st Artillery engaged them for as long as their fires could be observed and adjusted. Against a T-72 tank, an exploding 155mm round was ineffective, unable to do serious damage unless it scored a direct hit. But the shrapnel from the exploding rounds caused antennas and any other equipment on the outside of the vehicle to be stripped off or destroyed. Most T-72s carried extra fuel in drums on the backs of the vehicles that could be dropped when they moved into combat. Those drums were subject to shrapnel, and some caught fire when a piece of hot shrapnel penetrated the fuel drums. Several tanks continued to drive down the road with flames trailing behind as the fuel in the external fuel tanks burned. As the enemy ran out of sight, Colonel Al-Sorur reported their success to GHQ, which was under siege in downtown Kuwait City. GHQ was in a state of confusion at this point, with the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division moving on the 6th Circular Road, the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division moving east on Salmi Road, and the 3rd Special Forces Brigade assaulting Dasman Palace, as well as key government buildings downtown. Adding to the confusion was a lack of communications with the 6th Mechanized Brigade, in addition to calls from the 80th Brigade trapped inside its garrison camp and attempting to fight its way out through insurgents dressed as civilians. The Navy under siege at its base was also calling for assistance. GHQ had steady communications with the 15th Mechanized Brigade south of the city, which had not been engaged yet. Colonel Al-Sorur was instructed to move south and join the 15th Mechanized Brigade and prepare for further orders as a combined unit. As the 35th Brigade reformed and began moving south, the sun had passed its apex for the day. Colonel Al-Sorur was sure that the columns of black smoke rising above the city indicated that the sun would set on a Kuwait that was no longer free.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.